I found out my fiancé called me his Roomba while planning a $15,000 cheating trip to Bora, so I used my cousin to bankrupt him before he even left the country. Jake and I had shared a life for 3 tumultuous years. The initial 24 months had been tolerable, even pleasant, but the entire final year was a protracted campaign of emotional and psychological sabotage. He systematically began scrutinizing my private communication device, interrogating me about my whereabouts, and demanding to know the identity of my correspondence. His jealousy became irrationally inflamed if professional male associates reached out regarding mere business matters. Furthermore, he took to making derisive, public insinuations about my fidelity in the presence of our mutual acquaintances. When I inevitably expressed my distress, he would immediately dismiss my feelings, claiming I was excessively sensitive and proclaiming that only the culpable resort to defensiveness. The most agonizing aspect of this ordeal was the absolute truth: I had never once strayed from our commitment. Not in the slightest sense. My loyalty was absolute and unwavering, while he was merely projecting his own deeply flawed conduct onto my character. It was my closest confidant, Teresa, who first exposed his deceit. She had been my unwavering best friend since our high school days, essentially an adopted sibling. One evening, while Jake was purportedly working his late shift, she came over after I had mentioned yet another of his wild, unfounded accusations. I presented her with a text exchange where he questioned my 15-minute delay returning from a mundane grocery run and had the sheer audacity to imply I was meeting a clandestine paramour. Teresa's expression became distinctly peculiar. She showed me her own cellular device, revealing Jake's active profile on a popular dating application that very afternoon. His biographical description baldly stated he was unattached and seeking casual encounters. Teresa then confided that she had harbored suspicions for several weeks. A friend of hers had matched with him electronically but had instantly recognized him as my partner from photographs on my social media. Teresa had been meticulously amassing conclusive evidence before alerting me, determined to ensure the situation was not simply a grave misunderstanding. That night, we collaboratively devised an intricate scheme. Teresa was to establish a deceptive profile and attempt to engage him in a flirtatious exchange to ascertain the extent of his unscrupulous intentions. Teresa successfully matched with him within a few hours. He exhibited no trace of hesitation. Their ensuing conversations were utterly contemptible. He falsely informed her that he was single, all the while complaining bitterly about his psycho ex, meaning me, whom he claimed he was attempting to disengage from, but who simply refused to take the hint. When Teresa inquired why he didn't merely terminate the relationship, his written reply was chilling: she furnishes half the rent and handles all the domestic chores and culinary duties. Why forfeit that convenience until a superior arrangement presents itself? He even commenced sending her screen captures of private dialogues with other women he was actively pursuing. In these revolting chats, they would collectively ridicule my character and appearance. He characterized me as a most repulsive creature and something abhorrently unsightly to these women. There was one particularly vile message from Jake stating, "I practically gag whenever she attempts to kiss me," to which one of the women callously replied, "You are truly a saint for tolerating her. I would have abandoned that situation ages ago." Jake's response was, "It's a complex situation, but it won't be for much longer. I give you my assurance." These shocking exchanges were occurring with a multitude of different females. All of this transpired while he was simultaneously accusing me of infidelity. All this time, I was diligently preparing his favorite meals, laundering his attire, and desperately striving to substantiate my unwavering devotion to him. I did not immediately confront him. Teresa and I concluded that we required more than just circumstantial proof. We needed a methodical strategy. Not to somehow win him back, but to orchestrate his absolute and utter ruin. For the subsequent weeks, I maintained the facade of the perfect, unwitting girlfriend while Teresa meticulously continued her communication with him through the simulated profile. I would force a smile when he gave me a parting kiss each morning. I continued to prepare his sustenance and maintain his wardrobe. I even offered an unmerited apology when he had the nerve to accuse me of flirting with the delivery driver who had done nothing more than hand me our takeaway order and promptly depart. Throughout this charade, I was methodically formulating my detailed strategy. One evening, Jake returned home late, permeated by the distinct, unfamiliar scent of a stranger's expensive fragrance. When I innocently inquired about the lingering aroma, he instantly became livid with an unwarranted indignation, claiming I was descending into paranoia and suggesting I should perhaps seek professional consultation for my deep-seated insecurities. He even ventured to suggest that I might be experiencing a bout of depression, arguing that I hadn't been myself lately. I simply smiled serenely and offered a seemingly contrite apology, all the while mentally cataloging this latest offense to my ever-growing dossier of reasons why he profoundly deserved the impending consequences. I then embarked on a forensic review of our financial standing. We maintained a shared account for communal expenses, but Jake also possessed his private, individual investment portfolio, which he spoke of with such boastful self-admiration. He was perpetually emphasizing his financial acumen and disciplined saving habits, purportedly for our collective future. What an egregious mockery. Perusing our bank statements, I noticed substantial monetary withdrawals on the very evenings he claimed to be detained by late work commitments. Charges from exorbitantly priced restaurants, premium hotel accommodations, and boutique gift shop purchases were evident. It was at this moment I discerned the precise target for my retaliation: his inflated ego and his precious wealth. I recalled my cousin, Vicky. Everyone invariably commented on our similar physical features, though they consistently remarked that she was a more aesthetically pleasing iteration of myself, a backhanded compliment, courtesy of my own family. She shared my dark tresses and eyes, but possessed a greater stature and a more enviable physique, as my mother perpetually reminded me. She had been a highly sought-after model during her university years and effortlessly captivated attention wherever she went. Crucially, she was also indebted to me for a significant favor after I had supported her through a particularly brutal romantic dissolution the previous year. I summoned Vicky and Teresa for an urgent, clandestine meeting and meticulously recounted the entirety of my predicament. Vicky was incensed on my behalf. She adamantly asserted that Jake's actions constituted emotional abuse, transcending mere infidelity. And she was entirely correct. Teresa presented Vicky with all the incriminating evidence she had compiled, and Vicky expressed utter disbelief that any individual could be so vile and cruel while concurrently feigning the role of the victim. By the conclusion of our intense 3-hour deliberation, my emotional state had transformed. I was no longer merely angry, I was calculating, detached, and fully prepared. That night, as I observed Jake texting on his phone with that insipid, self-satisfied smirk, likely telling some unsuspecting woman how repulsive I was while in the act of wrongly accusing me, I made my final, decisive vow. I possessed my vindictive blueprint. Something that would make Jake rue every single contemptible utterance he had ever made about me. Something that would strike him exactly at the nexus of his deepest vulnerabilities. Teresa and Vicky were wholeheartedly committed, and together, we were about to impart the ultimate, unforgettable lesson. First update, the entrapment. Our strategic deployment resembled something extracted from a complex cinematic heist narrative, only this was reality, and I was fully immersed in its execution. We resolved that Vicky would stage an accidental encounter with Jake at his preferred athletic facility. He frequented the downtown fitness club every Tuesday and Thursday with unfailing regularity, ostensibly for personal training appointments. Now, however, I suspected he was merely scouting for female companionship. Vicky secured a temporary guest pass through a friend who held a membership. We diligently studied Jake's predictable itinerary. He consistently uploaded workout self-portraits accompanied by time-stamped captions. What a pathetically transparent fool. We pinpointed the precise moment and position for her to utilize the treadmill adjacent to his favorite bench press apparatus. On the inaugural day of Operation Takedown, Vicky arrived wearing a pair of incredibly provocative athletic leggings that even commanded my own appreciative second glance. She messaged me covertly from the gym, target acquired. His gaze has been fixed upon me since my entrance. The subsequent event unfolded with such predictable banality it was nearly tiresome. Jake inadvertently collided with her while reaching for a towel. He immediately initiated a conversation centered on protein consumption or some such triviality, and then brazenly requested her telephone number, claiming he wished to share advanced exercise techniques. By that very evening, he was already bombarding her with messages. I sat with Vicky on my sofa, devouring every single message. My stomach churned with a complex mix of anxiety and exhilaration. Teresa arrived with wine and prepared takeout, insisting we required sustenance for the psychological conflict ahead. The text exchanges were precisely as expected, fulsome compliments regarding her athletic form, direct inquiries about her relationship status, and tentative suggestions that they should grab a post-workout smoothie sometime. Here was the central, devastating irony: Jake had absolutely no inkling that Vicky was my direct relation. We shared certain similarities, but not in a manner that was instantly conspicuous unless one was paying close, detailed attention. And Jake had long since ceased to pay any real attention to me. The plan was fundamentally straightforward but utterly devastating in its potential. Vicky was to romance him, get him completely and utterly infatuated, compel him to lavish obscene amounts of money upon her, and then, at the strategic moment, we would unveil the full, horrifying truth. Meanwhile, I would continue to perform the role of the unsuspecting girlfriend, all the while secretly savoring the spectacle of him systematically excavating his own financial and emotional grave. Vicky and Jake held their first official date 3 days later. He informed me he had an obligatory work function that evening. I offered him a farewell kiss, advised him to enjoy his time, and then instantly drove to Teresa's apartment, where we meticulously monitored the entire evening via Vicky's continuous text updates. He escorted her to an outrageously expensive dining establishment that he had never once offered to take me to, despite my gentle suggestions regarding our anniversary. Vicky reported that he ordered the most costly wine available, boasted excessively about his high-level employment, and extravagantly praised his robust savings portfolio. He even possessed the staggering audacity to remark that he was practically unattached and was in the process of concluding a stagnant partnership. When Vicky sent us a photograph of herself from the restaurant's ladies' room, I nearly became physically ill. It was a surreal and nauseating moment witnessing my boyfriend on a dinner date with my own cousin, while I was perched on my best friend's couch consuming popcorn and meticulously planning his ruin. Teresa consistently reiterated that this was merely further confirmation of what a reprehensible individual he was, and that his restitution would soon be due, both figuratively and literally. Over the subsequent weeks, Jake developed an all-consuming obsession with Vicky. He began canceling our pre-arranged engagements to spend time with her, arriving home at progressively later hours, and sporting a smug, self-satisfied expression as if he harbored an extraordinary, magnificent secret, all the while Vicky delivered detailed situation reports to both Teresa and myself. The financial expenditure commenced modestly: dinners, minor gifts, concert passes. But Vicky operated with strategic precision. She would merely mention a piece of jewelry she admired while they were casually passing a luxury retailer. In no time at all, Jake was expending $500 on elaborate earrings simply to impress her. She would speak wistfully of a weekend escape destination she had always desired to visit, and suddenly, Jake was reserving opulent hotels and making firm arrangements. The most delicious aspect was Vicky's tactic of accidentally leaving these expensive acquisitions at his residence, claiming she feared losing them. In reality, this was to prevent him from ever being able to demand their return. She then promptly delivered them directly to me. I was now compiling a personal collection of costly jewelry, high-end designer accessories, and even a ridiculously priced timepiece he had purchased for her. All of it was procured with the money he boasted he was conserving for our collective future. As for the planned excursions and experiences, Vicky maintained a sophisticated method. She would persuade Jake to finalize all bookings using his personal credit card. She would then fabricate an excuse that she required cash for her proportional contribution, which he would instantly decline to accept, determined as he was to project an image of immense affluence. Following the weekend, she would use an electronic payment service to transfer her share of the funds back to me from Jake's cash payments. Sometimes I would appropriate the money for myself, but predominantly I would divide it among Teresa and Vicky for what we had designated our retribution reserve. We were accumulating a quite respectable financial nest egg. One weekend, Jake concocted a lie that he had a mandatory business conference in a coastal town 2 hours away. In reality, he was embarking on a romantic liaison with Vicky at a premium resort. Vicky had somehow convinced him that she required an $800 cash allowance for luxury spa treatments and personal shopping. He handed over the sum without a single query. That very same money financed my own spa day with Teresa at a nearby establishment while he was absent. We indulged in the full spectrum of lavish treatments, massages, facials, manicures, and pedicures, all courtesy of Jake's disposable income. We even posted photographs, fully cognizant that Jake had long since ceased monitoring my social media activity. Throughout this period, Jake became increasingly brazen and careless with his lies to me. He began claiming late work commitments 4 nights a week. He had supposed business excursions on the weekends. On one occasion, he even asserted that his mother had fallen critically ill so he could transport Vicky to a vineyard resort. His mother called me that same weekend to inquire if we were available for dinner. I hastily invented a cover story that Jake was suffering from severe food poisoning. Sustaining my role in this tiresome pretense was emotionally taxing. I was compelled to simulate that everything was entirely normal. I had to continue preparing his dinners, executing his laundry duties, and feigning contentment when he kissed me with the same disloyal lips he had been utilizing on my cousin. The situation was further complicated when Jake began to slander his horrible girlfriend, meaning me, to Vicky. Vicky, adhering to the legal requirements of our state concerning one-party consent, would record their conversations and forward them to me. Hearing him refer to me as desperate, overly dependent, and utterly oblivious fueled my desire to see his entire existence incinerated. The most damaging revelation was when he confessed to Vicky that he eagerly anticipated disposing of his dead weight, and that the only reason he hadn't terminated our partnership was because it was just so incredibly convenient to have someone subsidize the joint expenses and handle all the domestic drudgery. He literally referred to me as his Roomba that also contributes to the rent. Upon hearing that recording, I was so overcome with rage that I hurled a drinking glass against the wall when Jake was away. Teresa had to rush over and help me clean the debris before his return. Yet, despite the emotional anguish, the material gains from our elaborate scheme were beginning to amass. Vicky persuaded Jake to acquire a new, top-of-the-line smartphone for her because hers was perpetually malfunctioning. She immediately presented the device to me, as my own screen was cracked. She convinced him to purchase expensive designer footwear in her stated size, which conveniently matched my own shoe size. She even managed to coerce him into paying for a weekend yoga retreat that she never once attended. Teresa and I went in her stead, sharing constant laughter about how Jake was unwittingly financing my personal rejuvenation while operating under the delusion that I was confined to the apartment, managing his laundry. Approximately 2 months into the operation, Vicky initiated phase 2 of our strategy. She began lamenting her immense occupational stress, arguing that she desperately required a genuine, restorative vacation. She then strategically mentioned places she had always dreamed of visiting, locations that were, coincidentally, the very same destinations I had spoken of desiring to go. One evening, while dining with Jake, she dramatically dissolved into simulated tears over the fact that she had never been able to afford a truly luxurious holiday. Jake, eager to assume the role of the chivalrous savior, immediately offered his assistance. Before the evening concluded, he had finalized the booking for a weekend trip to an astonishing mountain resort 3 hours away. All expenses were prepaid. Here is where the narrative truly escalated. The day prior to the scheduled departure, Vicky contacted Jake, sobbing hysterically. She claimed her venerable grandmother was suddenly hospitalized, making it absolutely impossible for her to travel that weekend. Jake was utterly distraught, particularly since the reservation was non-refundable. Vicky, playing the part of the considerate partner, suggested he utilize the trip regardless, since he had been working so strenuously. Jake reluctantly consented. The moment Jake informed me that he was departing for a guys fishing excursion that weekend, his cover story for my benefit, I immediately contacted Vicky and Teresa. The final sequence was activated. Vicky had already discreetly furnished me with the complete reservation particulars. As soon as Jake departed for work the following morning, I swiftly packed my belongings, collected Teresa, and we drove directly to the identical resort Jake had secured for his rendezvous with Vicky. We checked in using the reservation Jake had paid for. The reception personnel registered no suspicion when I presented my identification. The booking was under Jake's name, but did not mandate the specification of guest names. We spent the entire weekend in unparalleled luxury, indulging in spa treatments, consuming gourmet meals, and embarking on guided hikes, all a generous contribution from Jake's credit limit. We even ordered expensive room service and billed it to the room. Meanwhile, Jake was texting Vicky, expressing his profound disappointment, yet claiming he was making the best of it on his illusory fishing trip with imaginary companions. We captured a multitude of photographs that weekend, taking scrupulous care not to publish them anywhere Jake might observe them. Those images were placed into what we had designated our evidence repository, the digital folder we would ultimately employ to demonstrate to Jake the sheer totality of how comprehensively he had been manipulated. The pattern persisted for another month. One of my most cherished deceptions was the birthday gift stratagem. Vicky mentioned that her closest friend's birthday was fast approaching and she wished to procure a particularly special gift but was currently experiencing a cash shortfall. Jake immediately volunteered his financial assistance. He ended up purchasing a high-end designer handbag that Vicky had meticulously selected, which she promptly delivered to me for my own birthday, which was actually the following week. I carried that handbag everywhere, even on dates with Jake. He complimented it on one occasion, remarking that it appeared quite costly. I simply smiled and claimed Teresa had acquired it for me, a technical truth. His private savings account was rapidly diminishing, and he began to complain to me about unexpected, work-related expenditures, suggesting we might need to exercise greater fiscal restraint for a while. The sheer unmitigated gall. Simultaneously, his dynamic with Vicky was, from his viewpoint, intensifying. He began discussing introducing her to his social circle, perhaps even his relatives. Vicky skillfully evaded this escalation, invariably maintaining him at that optimal distance, sufficiently near to continuously extract money from him, yet not close enough for the relationship to advance in any substantial, meaningful manner. What Jake remained utterly unaware of was that we were systematically building towards a monumental finale. Vicky had started subtly introducing the idea of a luxurious international vacation she had always dreamed of taking, some exclusive tropical destination featuring private, overwater bungalows where nightly rates were approximately $1,000 per evening. Jake, predictably, eagerly accepted the lure, beginning to explore options and attempt to calculate how he could possibly finance it. That's when we uncovered evidence that he had been surreptitiously transferring funds from our shared joint account into his private one to subsidize his double life. Money explicitly intended for our communal bills, our fundamental future. He had been pilfering from me to finance the courtship of my own cousin. Discovering those unauthorized transfers felt like being struck directly in the core of my being all over again. However, it also served to make me more irrevocably determined than ever to conclude this enterprise. As the third month of our concerted effort drew to a close, Jake was actively planning this extravagant international holiday, draining his entire savings portfolio for initial deposits and purchasing new travel accessories and ridiculous resort apparel. Little did he comprehend that his actions were directly facilitating the final stage of our elaborate mechanism. But we were not yet prepared to spring the trap. Not just yet. We had designated at least one more month of making him pay his dues. Literally. The most satisfying element was his profound state of cluelessness. He still genuinely believed I was completely oblivious. Still preparing his meals and managing his laundry like the ideal, docile girlfriend. Still convinced that Vicky was succumbing to his charms as completely as he was falling for hers. He continued to perceive himself as the one exerting complete control over the entire situation, but the control was entirely ours. And very, very soon, he was going to experience just how profoundly he had been outmaneuvered. Second update, the engagement and the loan request. Month 4 of Operation Annihilate Jake's Wealth was when the situation became exceptionally fascinating. By this juncture, Vicky had Jake so thoroughly captivated that he had grown careless and slipshod with his alibis to me. He would claim he was working late, but neglect to send the customary notification that he wouldn't be present for dinner. He would leave incriminating purchase receipts in his pockets that I would discover while performing his laundry duties. On one occasion, he even uttered Vicky's name when he was half asleep. I was forced to suppress my reaction so intensely that I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Meanwhile, our retribution reserve had swelled to nearly $4,000 in liquid capital, derived entirely from the funds Vicky had expertly extracted from him and shared with us. Teresa had also benefited handsomely. We would take turns utilizing the spa packages and restaurant vouchers Vicky had procured from him. One night, Jake returned home appearing noticeably anxious. He formally sat me down for a serious dialogue concerning our shared finances. Apparently, he was encountering some temporary cash flow irregularities and urgently needed me to assume a greater proportion of our collective expenses for the foreseeable future. Could I possibly remit the full rental fee next month instead of just my half, and perhaps also manage the utility payments? He solemnly vowed he would reimburse my expenses once his anticipated work bonus materialized. I nearly exploded with indignation right there. This contemptible individual was squandering thousands on my cousin while simultaneously requesting that I subsidize his fundamental living costs. But I maintained my composure, nodded sympathetically, and agreed to provide assistance. What alternative did his unaware girlfriend possess? The instant he exited the room, I alerted Vicky and Teresa. Phase escalation was now in effect. The following day, Vicky contacted Jake, pretending to be in tears. She claimed her automobile had experienced a critical failure and she immediately required $600 for urgent repairs. Jake, despite his recent declaration of being financially depleted, miraculously secured the capital within hours. Vicky accepted the cash, thanked him profusely, and then divided it equally between me and Teresa. We spent the money on a shopping excursion while her perfectly operational vehicle sat untouched in my apartment complex's visitor parking area. But the real focal point was the planning for the tropical getaway. Vicky had successfully convinced Jake to book an obscenely priced resort in Bora Bora. Jake was struggling desperately to generate the necessary funds, yet Vicky persistently sent him seductive images of the locale, emphasizing how it would be the most romantically sublime week of their lives. I observed from the peripheral shadows as Jake began liquidating his personal possessions to finance this trip. His prized vintage musical instrument collection, which he had never permitted me to even handle, was sold on a digital marketplace. The expensive timepiece bequeathed to him by his grandfather was pawned for cash. His highly touted cryptocurrency holdings were cashed out at a financial loss. All of this transpired while he was preaching to me that we needed to eliminate luxuries such as my simple morning coffee ritual and our streaming service subscription. One night, while Jake was bathing, I accessed his phone and discovered he had procured a substantial $15,000 personal installment loan. The sheer, utter madness. He was plunging himself into significant debt for a woman he had known for under 4 months while instructing his girlfriend of 3 years that we needed to practice frugality. Throughout this unfolding chaos, I was quietly executing my personal departure strategy. With Teresa's assistance, I had secured a new, modest, and securely situated apartment. I had been systematically transferring my crucial documents and irreplaceable, sentimental belongings to this new location, little by little. I had begun rerouting my mail to a separate postal box. I had even inaugurated a new banking account at a financial institution where Jake held no existing connections. However, the strain of maintaining the exhaustive deception was taking its toll. Playing the role of the supportive, naive partner while watching Jake systematically dismantle his financial well-being for another woman, even if that woman was my cousin acting on my behalf, was utterly draining. Some nights, I would lie next to him, wrestling with the powerful impulse to unleash a torrent of fury upon him regarding what a pathetic, disloyal cad he truly was. Teresa observed my growing distress and suggested we indulge in a mental reprieve day, financed by a portion of our retribution reserve. We secured a day package at a magnificent hot springs retreat about an hour outside the metropolitan area. The profound irony was that this was a location Jake had once solemnly promised to take me for our anniversary, only to later claim we could not financially afford it. The day at the hot springs was precisely the restorative experience I required. Soaking in the mineral-rich pools, receiving professional massages, sipping expensive sparkling wine at 11 a.m., all the while knowing Jake was toiling at his office, stressed about money, and completely unaware that he was funding my profound relaxation. It felt like exquisite, poetic justice. When I returned home that evening, Jake was already there, which was uncharacteristic. He appeared agitated, restlessly pacing the living area. My heart sank. Had he, by some chance, uncovered our elaborate scheme? No. It was something else entirely. He seated me and informed me that he had been engaged in serious contemplation regarding our relationship. This was it. He was finally going to terminate the relationship. After all the months of infidelity and falsehoods, he was going to conclude things so he could openly pursue Vicky. I prepared my expression of fabricated surprise, mentally rehearsing the call to Vicky and Teresa to inform them that we had to dramatically accelerate our timetable. But that is not at all what transpired. Instead, this utterly delusional man lowered himself onto one knee and produced a velvet box containing a ring, a pathetic, minuscule engagement ring. He began a rehearsed monologue about how he had been distant recently because he was navigating some personal conflicts, but had ultimately realized that I was the one he desired to share his remaining life with. That sometimes individuals fail to appreciate what they possess until it is nearly lost. That he yearned for us to commence anew. I was literally struck dumb. This was his desperate strategy, to attempt to bind me with a marital commitment while concurrently continuing his pursuit of Vicky on the side. Or was he planning to sever his connection with her? Regardless, it represented the most lamentably desperate, pitiful maneuver I could possibly conceive. The ring was undeniably diminutive, bearing no resemblance to the substantial piece he had once promised he would procure for me one day. Clearly, his financial affairs were in a far more dire state than I had originally surmised. I stood there paralyzed, my intellect rapidly cycling through various options. If I accepted the proposal, it would grant me additional time to extract the maximum possible retribution. If I declined, the game would be prematurely concluded. I made the choice that any self-respecting woman in my specific, vengeful position would make. I burst into tears. They were not entirely artificial, they were tears of seething, intense rage. I informed him that I required a period of contemplation. That his recent emotional distance had wounded me profoundly, and I was uncertain if our relationship was salvageable. That I loved him, an absolute lie, but urgently needed physical space to process his proposal. Jake was visibly crestfallen but attempted to mask it. He claimed he fully understood and would grant me all the time I needed. He even suggested I should go stay with my parents for a few days to clear my head. I nearly erupted with incredulous laughter. He was clearly attempting to remove me from the apartment so he could host Vicky there. I pretended to consent, swiftly packed a small satchel, and proceeded directly to Teresa's residence. The moment I arrived, I contacted Vicky and provided her with the full details of this insane new development. She, too, could not fathom it. What kind of psychopathic individual proposes marriage to one woman while actively finalizing an expensive, romantic holiday with another? We swiftly resolved to leverage this new situation to our distinct advantage. Vicky would act particularly needy and financially demanding in the forthcoming days, really pushing Jake to his ultimate monetary limits. Simultaneously, I would prolong the uncertainty regarding the proposal, requesting time and solitude while actually utilizing that time to perfect my final escape plan. Over the ensuing week, I stayed at Teresa's, but maintained daily, strategic communication with Jake. I texted him phrases like, "still thinking," and "need more time," while he responded with increasingly frantic and desperate messages about his enduring love for me and his willingness to do anything to restore our relationship. 10 days following the proposal, Jake contacted me, his voice sounding incredibly stressed. He needed to meet me in person to discuss something of crucial importance. My pulse quickened. Had he, somehow, unraveled our complex scheme? I consented to meet him at a local coffee shop the next day, and then immediately summoned Vicky and Teresa for an emergency tactical session. We decided I would wear a microscopic audio recording device. Teresa possessed one from her past journalism career, so they could monitor the conversation from Teresa's vehicle parked nearby. If the situation deteriorated, they would be immediately present to intervene. We also crafted a contingency narrative in the event Jake had discovered our activities. What Jake wished to discuss was not our operation at all. It was money. He confessed that he had recently made some extremely poor financial judgments and was now in severe distress. He had maxed out all his credit lines, secured personal loans, and even borrowed from friends. He needed my intervention to regain financial stability. Specifically, he desired that I obtain a substantial loan in my name to consolidate all of his accumulated debts. He gave his word that he would repay it, claiming it would be strictly temporary. He even suggested it could serve as the initial cornerstone of our life together, proving that we were a unified partnership that supported one another through adversity. I sat there, stupefied by his monumental audacity. This man had squandered thousands on another woman, lied to my face for several months, and now desired that I personally incur debt to resolve the financial turmoil he had manufactured entirely by attempting to impress my cousin. It took every fiber of my being to prevent myself from tossing my hot coffee directly into his face. Instead, I calmly informed him that I needed to deliberate on the matter, acknowledging it as a momentous decision, and stating that I was still attempting to process his proposal, and this request introduced an entirely new layer of complication. I observed the raw desperation in his eyes as I departed, promising to furnish him with my decision shortly. The instant I rejoined Teresa's car, we all erupted into uncontrollable laughter. The sheer nerve of this worthless man was almost commendable. Vicky immediately commenced planning the next move. She would inform Jake that she had received an unexpected and significant work bonus and could now make a substantial contribution toward their vacation. All he was required to do was finalize the remaining bookings, and she would ostensibly reimburse him for her portion. Naturally, that reimbursement would never materialize, but Jake was unaware of this detail. Over the subsequent days, Jake secured the final reservations for their Bora excursion. He was forced to borrow money from his sibling to cover the final few $1,000s, but the deed was done. All arrangements were non-refundable, and all were made under both their names. The holiday was scheduled to begin in precisely 2 weeks. Their flights were set to depart on a Friday morning, which meant we had 12 critical days to execute the ultimate phase of our plan. And Jake had no conception whatsoever of the impending disaster. Last update, the finale. Those final 12 days preceding Jake's romantic Bora getaway, a source of immense private amusement for me, were simultaneously the most high-stakes and exhilarating period of my entire life. Our strategy was planned to the absolute minute. But there was a perpetual risk that he might discover something, or that Vicky might inadvertently commit a misstep. Meanwhile, Jake became increasingly frantic concerning his monetary crisis. He constantly texted me about the loan, writing things like, "I wouldn't ask unless it was critically important, and this is absolutely about our shared future." The unflinching impertinence of this man, believing I would willingly embrace debt for him while he was planning a luxury excursion with another woman, even if that woman was my cousin operating on my behalf, was breathtaking. I finally agreed to meet him for dinner to discuss our relationship and the financial complication. I intentionally selected a modest, mid-range establishment where we had shared our first date, partially for its symbolic significance and partially because I knew he could no longer financially support anything more lavish. At this point, I devoted extra time to my preparation, ensuring my appearance was stunning, my hair perfectly styled, my makeup flawless, and wearing a striking red gown he had always admired. When I arrived, Jake's face illuminated with intense hope. He had been anticipating that I was going to terminate the relationship, but my flawless appearance suggested a contrary outcome. We ordered food and engaged in awkward, stilted conversation, all while his gaze intermittently darted toward my left hand, noting my deliberate omission of his pathetic engagement ring. Finally, I proceeded directly to the point. I informed him that I had been doing extensive consideration regarding our future and my ultimate desires. His face assumed a serious and expectant expression. Then, I deployed the first strategic maneuver. I told him I had researched the loan he desired me to secure and could likely qualify for a sum of $25,000. The relief that washed over his face was instantaneous and profound, like a drowning person spotting a lifeline. He immediately reached for my hand across the table, clutching it tightly while emphasizing how much this meant to him. How he would absolutely repay me. How this action proved our destiny to be together. I offered a slight smile and stated there was only one single precondition. I required complete access to all his financial documentation before I committed to the loan. Bank statements, credit card balances, every last detail, simply so I could fully comprehend the extent of the liability I was about to undertake. His face froze instantly. I maintained an innocent, guileless expression, as if this were an entirely rational demand from a partner about to assume their significant other's crippling debt. He stammered something about how this was unnecessary, that he would manage all the repayments himself, that I shouldn't worry my pretty little head about the details. I insisted, asserting that this was non-negotiable, that if we were truly going to construct a life together, absolute financial transparency was mandatory. Jake appeared to be on the verge of becoming ill. He excused himself to the restroom, taking his phone with him. When Jake returned to the table, he had regained a semblance of control. He consented to show me his financial records soon, but argued that the most pressing issue was processing the loan application immediately due to his urgent deadlines. I nodded empathetically while mentally adding this manipulative response to the mountain of evidence confirming his status as a calculating, worthless egotist. I informed him that I would visit the bank on Monday, this being Friday evening, to initiate the application process. His relief was palpable. Little did he know I harbored zero intention of ever securing him a single cent. Throughout the weekend, Jake was exceptionally attentive and affectionate, bringing me coffee in bed, suggesting we view my preferred films, even cleaning the apartment without prompting. All the while, he was relentlessly texting Vicky about their imminent trip, which was now only 9 days away. Monday morning arrived, and I informed Jake that I had a scheduled appointment at the bank. I dressed in my most professional attire and departed the apartment while he wished me well. My actual destination was a meeting with Teresa and Vicky at our current favorite coffee establishment to finalize the minute details of the grand conclusion. When I returned home that evening, Jake was waiting with an expectant expression. I informed him that the bank required additional time to review my application, but that the prospects appeared positive. He attempted to conceal his disappointment and stress, but I observed his hands shaking slightly as he embraced me. For days prior to the trip, Vicky executed her trump card. She contacted Jake, sobbing, claiming her venerable grandmother had just been rehospitalized, and she might be forced to fly home to attend to her instead of traveling to Bora. Jake descended into panic, desperately offering solutions. Could they postpone the trip? No, it was non-refundable. Could her grandmother perhaps wait a few days? Vicky expressed her shock that he would suggest such a heartless thing. What if he accompanied her to see her grandmother instead? No, it was strictly a family-only affair during a health crisis. After allowing him to fret and agonize for 24 hours, Vicky called back with favorable news. Grandmother was stable, and the physician assured her there was no need for immediate concern. The Bora trip could proceed as planned. Jake was so overwhelmingly relieved that he actually dispatched flowers as a get-well-soon gesture for the grandmother. Flowers that were, in reality, delivered to my new apartment, where Vicky was now residing part-time as we meticulously prepared for the final phase. 2 days before the trip, Jake was a complete nervous wreck. The bank, meaning me, had still not sanctioned the loan he so desperately required. He was attempting to pack for Bora while clandestinely concealing his luggage in the back of his closet.